morning, I'm Jesse Rogers. Welcome to Kenya's premier Sunday morning political broadcast. This is Inside Politics. Now today we review the proposals, both new and old, in the published BBI draft bill. Even with the rollout of signature collection countrywide, is civic education a weak link? What of the 70 new constituencies and a top-up after elections? Is the cost of representation too much? Also, the clock is ticking as December 7th approaches. This is when KMPDU will initiate a countrywide strike in the midst of a pandemic. We evaluate the progress made, if any, in the week in terms of the COVID-19 recovery plan. And finally, the flamboyant Nairobi City Governor Mike Mbuvi Sonko is in hot soup. A total of 86 out of 122 MCAs have appended their signatures in an impeachment motion against the governor. Where does this leave Nairobi County if the motion sails through? Stay with us for the next 120 minutes as we dissect the biggest political and policy issues in the Republic. Let me bring on board our panelists today. Already joining us is Dismas Mokua, who's a political risk analyst. Many thanks for your time. Mark Bichachi has also joined us, communication strategist. We expect Roslyn Obala later on, who's a senior reporter at The Standard. Many thanks for your time. Let's just begin with the latest in terms of the structure of the BBI, or rather the contents of the BBI draft bill. Now, will the Building Bridges initiative enhance Parliament's oversight or conveniently cover up flaws of the executive as previously witnessed? Well, this is the question confronting Kenyans as they continue to interrogate the BBI suggestion for ministers to be picked from Parliament and the return of a once powerful post of Prime Minister. Let's take a look at our report by our reporter Murimi Mwangi.
Prime Minister.
Wednesday the 9th of May 2012, and former Prime Minister Raila Odinga was on the firing line of then Eldoret North legislator and Higher Education Minister William Ruto.
The Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, needs to tell the country whether the rhetoric that he is involved in, is it campaign propaganda that he is distributing?
It is this House, at the instigation, Mr. Speaker, of the people who are known, whom Mr. Speaker took Kenyans to be tried at the ICC.
Such was the intensity of charged debates stirring top political supremos that came to define the National Assembly sittings on Wednesday from 3 p.m. during what came to be known as the Prime Minister question time, when the PM was tasked to answer all queries from members for at least 1.5 hours. A weekly culture that could make a comeback should Kenyans okay the Odinga and President Uhuru Kenyatta championed referendum bill that returns the position of Prime Minister to lead government business in Parliament.
Then ministers are going to be sitting in the National Assembly. They will be asked questions and they will have to answer.
But will this proposal enhance Parliament's watchdog role or extend to Parliament the impunity previously witnessed in the executive through ministers sitting in Parliament?
As a cabinet minister, you remember before I get elected to Parliament, I go and I listen to people. During my campaigns, I make pledges. I go, I understand the road infrastructure that is not working. I know one-on-one. So when I am appointed, when someone even raises something, I can be able to easily relate with it.
The problem we've been having is that cabinet ministers or cabinet secretaries are people who are not politicians, are people who are removed from politics. They were supposed to be technocrats working with the president, but the president and his deputy were politicians elected by the people. And most of the time, what they were telling the president and what they were advising the president was always different from what the president and his deputy were hearing.
Whenever cabinet secretaries now appear before committees, they appear long after a long time, and usually maybe even the member asking the question has even lost interest or steam, and I think the system doesn't serve us well enough as we were used to under the old system, and therefore for me it is a welcome proposal
But while the BBI referendum bill is yet to be sealed in a popular vote, as its promoters intensify collection of signatures, analysts argue the return of the post of Prime Minister, the two deputies and cabinet ministers and their assistants from Parliament could raise the scramble for member of National Assembly seats.
The challenge is to Kenyans. Make sure the person you are sending to Parliament is a person who has the stature and the composure to be able to sit and fill this at the same level with the cabinet secretary.
More importantly, we've just reordered our politics. If you want to be the leader of government, you go for the presidency. But if you also want to be the leader of opposition, you go for the presidency, knowing that if you fall short, you are on the opposition benches.
And as the BBI debate continues, so does the Kenyatta succession backroom power play, as key political players anchor their 2022 game plan on the success or otherwise of the BBI referendum bill. Murubi Mwangi, KTN News.
All right, now that's part of the latest in terms of some of the contentious issues in the first BBI draft that have been reviewed. Just to highlight some of the changes, proposed establishment of the Kenya Police Council and the elevation of Nairobi County to a special status has been dropped. The Judicial Ombudsman will be nominated by the President, vetting and approval done by the Senate. The bill has also factored in views by pastoralist communities to ensure the state promotes sustainable sources of livelihood, but also creation of 70 new constituencies and a top-up after elections. Now, this was some of the contentious issues that were raised during the launch of the BBI report earlier on at Bomas of Kenya. Now, let's just bring in our panelists to highlight some of this and what it means for Kenyans going forward, even as signature collection is ongoing. Dismas Mukua, very good morning to you. I'd love to hear what you have to say about the published BBI draft bill.
Jesse, for times above number, we've been arguing in this forum that the two BBI architects need to take into active consideration the divergent views and observations of Kenyans of goodwill who are interested in having a very solid BBI document, and at the same time ignore the people who have treated BBI with contempt right from the word go. And it seems to me that the two BBI architects have responded to our request, and they've accommodated the divergent views which serve our national and public interest. And that's extremely important, because in as much as we want to produce a perfect document, we will not do the perfect document at one go. And President Kenyatta indicated at KICC that there will be future amendments coming up wherever there's a leadership and they think they need to come up with new amendments. Those will be welcome. And in my view, that's a welcome idea, so that we are able to carry along people who have our national and public interest at heart and ignore anybody else who is trying to blackmail or intimidate the entire process. And of note, you noticed that during the BBI, when they were launching their signatures, the people with the heaviest political capital in Kenya, all of them were present, apart from the Deputy President William Samoei Ruto, who said that he was not invited. And the following day, you saw the Honorable Musalia Mudavadi, who has been doing a check of the proposals and doing some tracking at the changes. He gave a very elaborate presentation, and he captured the 9 items that had been reviewed because of the public interest and public pressure. And I think now, making progress, we should be very happy as a nation that we've got a working document that we need to implement. And if there need to have changes, those changes can come in the near future. But as it is right now, we must ensure that when we're debating these proposals and eventually when they go to the National Assembly and the Senate, everything that is going to be implemented, everything that is going to be captured, it serves our national and public interest. And we shouldn't fall into the propaganda trap of Tom, Dick, and Harry saying that this is a Raila document, this is a Uhuru document. No, this is an Akinyi document, this is an Afula document. A document which captures the interests and aspirations of all Kenyans. And anybody else who wants to derail this process must be called out.
All right, Dismas, quite briefly, are you concerned with the manner in which the document has been made available to members of the public, civic education and the likes?
Well, from where I'm seated, I'm able to access the documents, but I speak that one as somebody with a deliberate interest in the Kenyan political space. But when I speak to some of my friends in the countryside, they say to me that they've not had the chance to review the document, especially the latest one. So it's incumbent on the BBI architects to ensure that this document is circulated countrywide, and probably even translated to the local languages, the native languages, so that everybody reads and understands. And in my view, it actually serves the interests of the BBI architects, so that when you have an informed citizen, then they'll not be influenced by propaganda. But right now, if a number of Kenyans have not had the chance to socialize with the document, it's very easy for them to be driven one way or another by propaganda.
All right. Now, in terms of the contents of the BBI report, Mark Bichachi, are you concerned with the independence of the judiciary with the changes that have been made?
Well, you know, for me, the independence was never a concern to me because the Chief Justice himself is an appointee of the President, and therefore we need to understand. And it's just that Kenyans have a lot of suspicion on the leaders they choose, which is already an oxymoron in and of itself. But the fact that the architects of BBI have acquiesced and allowed that the judicial ombudsman be vetted by Senate and appointed by the President is a step in the right direction, because it never hurt the country for someone to be vetted by a sitting assembly. It never hurt a democracy to have a check on the judiciary and have someone within the judiciary who can take administrative justice to the next level. And as we know, and every Kenyan who's probably attended a court hearing or a court case will tell you that the judiciary does have a lot of holes which we as a people need to address. So the issue for me was never about independence of the judiciary, but it was about creating a check and balance within the judiciary to ensure that justice is served to the Kenyan people. And you know, as is typical, ombudsmen are charged with such issues as how long does a case take. You know that in this country, I remember one time I had a matter in court, and this was in 2016, and they were hearing a case that had started in 1996. So you can imagine how long justice takes, and you know, justice delayed is justice denied. So you do need a system that keeps the judiciary in check. That person, of course, should not be used to achieve political ends in any stretch of the imagination. But these are the steps forward that we are taking as a country. And one of the things that I am uniquely thankfully for is the fact that the BBI has brought us to a circumstance where we're talking about serious issues in this country. There was a time on this show we were forced to discuss about wheelbarrows. Now, if you put wheelbarrows and judicial independence and ombudsman on the same table, then you can see that the conversation of this country is maturing, and we're having conversations that matter. And that's the important thing. Even when you look at the other issues, when people say that parliament has too many numbers, then you're also asking the questions of universal suffrage as represented in parliament. You know, is it a fair thing that some parliamentarians go in there with 20,000 votes, others go in there with 300,000 votes, and they'll have one vote per person? And then, of course, we're also discussing the issues of gender equality and two-thirds gender rule within the houses of parliament. Right. So we are headed in the right direction, in my view.
And that's proper. Allow me to introduce my colleague, Rosaline Obala, who's a senior reporter at The Standard. Rosaline, I mean, in terms of gender representation, Mark Bichachi has just mentioned, it seems to be a gain. But when you look at the issue of adequate representation and what seems to be coming to the taxpayers, creation of 70 new constituencies and a top-up after elections, what do you make of all this, including the addition of responsibilities to the Senate?
Thank you very much, Jesse. I think if you look at the document, what Parliament has not done is the enactment of the constitutional requirement for the two-thirds gender rule. and the issue has been, how do we achieve this in Parliament? The Constitution expressly gives guidelines on how to meet the gender requirement in the county assemblies, but it did not give the express provisions in the Constitution for Parliament. Now, if you look at the latest bill, the Constitution of Kenya Amendment Bill 2020, and you look at how they want to meet this issue of gender parity, then you look at in terms of even the Senate, we've been told that the 47 county women representatives will now go to the Senate. But remember, in the National Assembly, the affirmative action position was meant to build capacity of women so that they can go for the single constituency seats. And it had a lapse period of 20 years. Again, if you look at the National Assembly, these women were able to handle the Affirmative Action Fund, which was around 2.2 billion. Now, if you take them to the Senate that does not deal with actual allocation of funds, then I think you water down again the role of the women in terms of empowering women. As much as now the Senate has been enhanced and it will look after funds in the counties, remember the county women representatives were actually not just representing the counties, but they were actually representing all women in the counties. Now, if you go to the National Assembly, we are told that the 7 seats that were supposed to be top-up have now been converted into constituencies. We are not guaranteed that these 70 constituencies will actually be clinched by women. Now, on top of that, we are being told that they will do cumulative of the 260 constituencies and see how many women have been elected to join Parliament. Now, if you look at the current Parliament and you look at the percentage of women that actually were elected to join Parliament, around 78, that is the 47 women and then the 24 single constituencies. So in terms of addressing the gender parity, I think still the bill has not come clearly on how to address the issue of women, because now that doesn't tell us how much. If, for example, we say the scenario is the 360 single constituencies all go to men, then it means that Parliament will have to nominate 170 women to bridge the gap that will be in the National Assembly. Now, if you look at even currently in Parliament, and I've seen the Speaker talk about it, because of the bloated House, we have the legislators speak for 1 minute. Now, if we increase the numbers, for how long will a member get to actually ventilate an issue affecting their people? I think it will now be less than 1 minute. Is this where we want to go as a nation? And then maybe to talk also about the bloated Parliament. And I've heard the Speaker also talk about it, that the current structure is not favorable to Wanjiku. Because remember, the executive is not in Parliament. You cannot hold the ministers to account because they only appear before the committees. And this has been a very big challenge, where committee questions, legislators' questions which are ventilated on the floor take months to be responded to, because the committee has to go and look for the minister, they have to look for the PS. Sometimes they get a statement from the ministry just a minute to walking into the House. So you find that the chair of that committee will just be reading a statement without understanding what exactly that statement entails. So I think bringing back the executive to Parliament has actually been what Parliament has been agitating. But now in terms of increasing the numbers, that is where the problem is, in terms of burdening the taxpayers.
Okay, now that's definitely a challenge. But something that is also touted as a challenge, Dismas Mukue, is the consensus issue, which seems to be quite contentious, as you also mentioned right here. But let's talk about the bottom-up, not trickle-down economics and the importance of leaders actually stating their stance on the BBI. I mean, we saw most political leaders present during the launch of the signature collection at KICC. Ruto was conspicuously missing, and it started that he's remained non-committal on his stand on the BBI. What's the importance of leaders actually pathing the way forward in terms of their agenda?
You've raised the 3 issues, and I'd like to respond to them one by one. Now, we were told that this constitution is largely an NGO constitution and activist, and we wanted to have a 2/3 of the gender rule. So have a number of seats for men or women, depending on which gender has got the majority. Now the BBI acts, and in the proposal, they say that if you don't have the requisite numbers, then you're going to have a top-up, and there's increased capacity for ladies at the Senate. You cannot again blame the BBI architects for coming up with the numbers, because simply that is a constitutional requirement. And if you're worried about the contribution of the females, either in the National Assembly or Senate, that is a quantitative issue. You cannot legislate a quantitative issue. The first hurdle is to have the females go to the National Assembly and Senate in the right number so as to respect the Constitution. Now, how they're going to behave in the National Assembly or Senate, that one you can't have it in the Constitution. That is left to Nekesa and Wafula to elect people who are going to be solid. Then the second point around consensus. The BBI access indicated that they wanted to have a document acceptable to all Kenyans, and they've opened several windows. And any leader who has come up with a very solid contribution consistent with our national agenda, our national interest and public interest, those have been accumulated. Now, the people you saw at KICC, those are the leaders with the serious political capital, that their utterances have got serious outcomes in our political space. But one leader was not present for some reason. And in my view, that is disrespect to the President of the Republic of Kenya, disrespect to the party. And you know, for times above number, he had said he wanted to have a consensus document where you are going to have all ideas captured, all shades captured. And the window was opened. But instead of showing up to show his commitment, he decided to take a walk. And you've seen that he's been flip-flopping, is not able to take a position on anything. But again, because he's a very sharp politician, he's reading from the 48 rules of power that he wants to create suspense. But at this stage, Kenyans do not want suspense. Kenyans want a document which is going to look at the socioeconomic position of Kenya. And you notice that during that meeting at KICC, all the leaders who were there, you could see from their body language, they're willing to do this thing, not because they like the president or the deputy, but because they like the content and they know the content will take Kenya to the next level. And the following day, Musalia Mudavadi took the liberty to tell Kenyans to track all the changes and discuss the implication. Now, that is the kind of leadership we want, so that we have a very solid constitution which captures the interests and aspirations of all Kenyans. But now when you go back to the deputy president, as it is right now, he's got 3 options, and we have predicted those 3 options before on this show. The first one is proactively engage in BBI, and one would have expected him to go to KICC and lead the signature collection, not at his base in Rift Valley, but at a national level. Then the second one is to proactively oppose it, state in black and white that I do not like these documents. And the third one is to give it a wide berth. But it seems to me that he is going to employ the triangulation policy, that he is waiting for the waters to come down. He will run with the BBI and he will want to take credit for its success.
Rosaline Obala, even as you reply, quite briefly, I would like to take this opportunity to bring in the Jubilee Party as it actually cracks the whip on Ruto's allies again. Tuju says any member who decides to go against the party position on BBI risks disciplinary action. Quite briefly, Rosaline.
Yeah, I think this document is actually being sponsored by the Jubilee Party. Remember, President Uhuru Kenyatta is a party leader, just like Raila Odinga is opposition leader. So in terms of taking a position for the party, and this one, the Secretary General said that next week they will actually issue a statement drumming support for this document and rallying their leaders to support the document. So those who will not support this document will either face suspension or will be expelled from the party. And this is not new. Remember, this week there were 3 MCAs who were summoned to the party who had actually gone against the party will, and now they have been suspended. So I think this time it's a walk in the park. We'll see if actually Jubilee will crack the whip, because remember the other time they summoned the nominated senators They summoned other leaders, and so far we have not seen any sanctions. But now we are seeing the start with the assembly.
Right.
Let us see how it happens next week.
Let's see if those threats actually do materialize. Mark Bichachi, quite briefly.
You know, Jesse, there's this idea that somehow women have lost some money when we remove the 47 women reps and move them to the Senate. Number one, the Senate handles all the big issues of agriculture, early childhood education, all the things that affect the average woman are handled by the Senate. Second, let us also remember that the purpose of the 2/3 gender rule was never supposed to be something that is tokenism to our ladies or even to men. It was supposed to be something that the people of Kenya democratically choose to select more women. And therefore, political parties have been urged to put more women onto the ballot. And secondly, we must understand that this fear-mongering that now we will have 300 and something odd men in parliament and then we will have to top up women is a lie. Because then we are telling the Kenyan people that they are totally incapable of choosing a woman. And this is a misleading concept. Lastly, it is quite foolhardy to imagine that the purpose of a legislature is to run a kitty called CDF or whatever we try to imagine. That's not the purpose of legislation. This is part of the reason we keep losing it as a country. We did it, yes, it's important, it's working, but that's not the main reason why we choose legislatures. We choose a legislature to represent us in the corridors of power, to come up with policies, regulations, and rules that are beneficial to the people. Now, if you are trying to tell me that that primary goal will be dissolved because women are now sitting as equal members in Senate, then clearly we are A, underestimating the power of our women, and B, totally misunderstanding the reason why we have legislatures in the first place.
Okay, your point is definitely across. I'll definitely give Rosaline Obala a chance to reply because it seems the gender issue is quite close to her heart. But even as we compliment ourselves, we have stuck to the gender rule today in terms of our panelists. So that's kudos to us. Anyway, let's take a short break. When we come back, we'll take a look at the plight of the healthcare workers in the country and the whole COVID-19 recovery plan. December 7th, rather, is when the KMPDU health workers are set to commence the strike. What steps have been made so far? We find out after this short break.